It was just 2 weeks before Christmas, and Mr. John's house was filled with the sound of bustling excitement. The children raced through the halls, their laughter echoing as they prepared for their annual Christmas trip to the village. They were thrilled, as it was the only time of the year they would get to see their extended family. The village, with its fresh air, towering trees, and playful cousins, was their haven during the holidays. However, unbeknownst to them, this particular Christmas would not be like any other. They were about to face an unexpected tragedy that would forever change their lives. Yu, Mr. John's wife, was in the kitchen, packing clothes, and preparing snacks for the journey. She was always meticulous about getting everything ready days in advance, ensuring nothing was forgotten. But amidst all the preparation, there was one thing that weighed heavily on her heart. Her husband, Mr. John, had never once prayed. "John, please, just take a moment and pray with us," Yu urged, as she folded a shirt and placed it into a bag. Mr. John, who was preoccupied with organizing the car, waved his hand dismissively. "Yu, stop with all that prayer talk. God knows I'm traveling, I don't need to remind him," he chuckled, brushing her off with a smile. But Yu's heart sank. She looked at her husband with a mixture of sadness and concern. "Why won't you understand?" she whispered to herself, feeling helpless. The children, like their father, had also begun to distance themselves from the practice of prayer. The older ones often grumbled when they saw Yu kneel down to pray in the mornings. "Mama, why do we have to pray every day?" they would complain, their faces contorted with boredom. Despite their resistance, Yu remained steadfast. She continued to pray each day, asking God to protect her family. But in her heart, she longed for Mr. John to join her even just once. The day of the trip finally arrived, and the house was buzzing with excitement. The bags were packed, filled with clothes, snacks, and gifts for the long journey. The children eagerly discussed what they would do in the village, excited to see their cousins and enjoy the holidays. Meanwhile, Mr. John smiled at their enthusiasm, but Yu sat quietly, a thoughtful expression on her face. She silently prayed, her heart whispering a prayer of protection for her family. "Lord, keep us safe this Christmas." As the days drew closer to their departure, little did they know that something ominous was waiting for them, a challenge that would test their faith and change everything. One evening, Mr. John was returning home from work, his mind occupied with thoughts of the upcoming journey. As he turned a corner, he saw an elderly woman standing by the side of the road. She waved at him, her tired face marked by age, her clothes worn and faded. She carried a small basket in her hands. Mr. John slowed down and stopped the car. "Mama, where are you headed?" he asked, leaning out of the window. The old woman, with a soft voice, replied, "My son, I'm going to the next street. Would you be kind enough to give me a ride?" Mr. John, always ready to help, smiled. "Of course, Mama. Hop in." The woman climbed into the car and settled herself quietly in the seat. For a while, they drove in silence, the engine purring softly, and the only sound was the occasional chirping of crickets outside. Then, the old woman broke the silence with a gentle cough and spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "My son," she began, "I hope you won't be offended by what I'm about to say." Curious, Mr. John glanced at her. "What is it, Mama?" "Please," she continued, her voice growing even softer, "this Christmas, you and your family must not travel to the village. If you must go, then pray and fast before the journey. There is great danger ahead." Mr. John was taken aback, his mind reeling with disbelief. He chuckled softly to himself. "Mama, I've been traveling to the village every year for Christmas, and nothing has ever happened. What's the harm in going this time? You're just being superstitious." The old woman's eyes darkened with a hint of sorrow. "I've spoken the truth, my son. I've only come to warn you. The rest is up to you." They continued their drive in silence. When they arrived at her destination, Mr. John stopped the car, and the old woman climbed out, turning to him one last time. "Thank you for the ride," she said quietly. "Remember my words, pray and fast if you must go." Mr. John, now a bit unsettled, waved her off with a smile. "Thank you, Mama. Take care." As he drove away, he shook his head, dismissing her warnings as nothing more than idle superstition. After all, he had made this trip every year without incident. What could possibly go wrong? 2 days later, the house was abuzz with preparations for the journey. The bags were packed, and the excitement was palpable. The children chattered endlessly about the village and all the fun they would have with their cousins. Yu, as usual, remained calm. Before they left, she gathered everyone in the living room. "Let's pray before we go," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. Mr. John frowned, irritated by the interruption. "Yu, why do you insist on praying? We're not traveling to the moon, it's just the village. I'll go warm up the car." Yu sighed but knelt down to pray with the children. Her voice was soft but filled with conviction as she whispered her usual prayer, "Lord, protect us, and guide my family." Meanwhile, outside, Mr. John started the car, but to his surprise, the engine didn't roar to life. It sputtered weakly and then fell silent. "Not again," he muttered, puzzled. He turned the key again, but the car refused to start. Frustrated, he got out of the car and opened the bonnet. He fiddled with the engine, trying to figure out what was wrong. Nothing seemed out of place, but still, the car wouldn't start. He shook his head in disbelief. "I don't understand," he muttered. He walked back inside to find Yu. "The car won't start," he said, his frustration clear. "I've checked it, but something's wrong." Yu simply looked at him, her expression calm. "Maybe God doesn't want us to go," she said softly. Mr. John, already irritated, snapped back. "Stop with all this talk of God. It's just a car problem. I'll call the mechanic." The mechanic arrived soon after, tools clinking in his bag. He inspected the engine carefully before standing up and shaking his head. "Sir, the engine is knocked. This car won't be going anywhere until it's fixed." Mr. John stared at him in disbelief. "Knocked? How is that even possible? I drove this car just yesterday, and there was nothing wrong with it." The mechanic simply shrugged. "These things happen, sir. I can't explain it." Yu, ever patient, gave her husband a knowing look. "God has a reason," she said gently. Mr. John, however, was not convinced. "God? Don't be ridiculous, Yu. This is just bad luck." After a few moments of heated debate, Mr. John finally gave in. "Fine," he grumbled. "We'll take a bus. It's not ideal, but it will get us there." The bags were quickly repacked, and despite Mr. John's frustration, the family made their way to the bus station. The children were still thrilled about the trip, while Yu's heart felt heavy, knowing that something wasn't right. She prayed quietly to herself, "Lord, take control." As they arrived at the busy bus station, the air was thick with the noise of vendors and travelers. Mr. John still couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his chest, but he tried to push it aside. After all, Christmas was meant to be a time of joy and family. The family climbed onto the bus, and as the vehicle rumbled to life, Yu turned to her husband. "John, you haven't prayed," she said softly. Mr. John, still uneasy but trying to stay calm, smiled at her. "Don't worry, Yu. I'll pray once we get there." As the bus sped down the road, the winds outside grew colder, and the shadows deepened. The family was unaware that they were driving straight into a storm that would soon change their lives in ways they could never have imagined. Meanwhile, back in the village, Mama Amaka sat in the shade of her mud hut, watching the dusty road with a look of quiet resentment. Every year, Mr. John and his family arrived in their shiny car, full of wealth and happiness. Their lives seemed perfect. Yu and the children always looked so well-fed and content, while Mama Amaka's 4 sons could barely afford to return home. And when they did, it was usually on foot or riding old bicycles. Her bitterness simmered. Why must they flaunt their wealth every Christmas, she muttered under her breath. This year, it will be different. Determined to put an end to what she saw as Mr. John's superiority, Mama Amaka sought the help of her closest friend, Mama I, who shared her jealousy and bitterness. Together, they made their way to the forest, deep into the heart of darkness, where the village witches lived. The air was thick with a strange chill as they approached the witch's hut, its shadow seeming to stretch out to greet them. Inside, the leader of the witches, an ancient woman whose face was as gnarled as a dry leaf, greeted them with a voice that echoed like thunder. "What do you want?" she asked, her eyes glowing with dark power. Mama Amaka knelt before her, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "I want you to stop my stepson, John, from coming to the village this year. His success mocks me. I want him to suffer." The witches cackled with dark delight. "That is a simple task," the leader said. "But remember, every spell comes with a price." Without hesitation, they began their dark rituals, chanting in unison as they prepared their potion. They added pieces of cloth from Mr. John's last visit, tossing them into a bubbling cauldron filled with thick black liquid. The air around them crackled with dark energy as the leader of the witches raised her hands. "It is done," she declared. "Your wish will be granted." Mama Amaka smiled, her heart swelling with triumph. "This year, John and his family will not laugh at me again." Back at Mr. John's home, the family finally boarded the bus. Their excitement had not waned, but an inexplicable tension lingered in the air. Little did they know that, in that very moment, their fate had been sealed. As the bus rolled away, they were headed straight into the heart of a storm, both literal and metaphorical, that would change their lives forever.